sighting come to you from Ruaha. Last day, getting a morning game drive in before I fly out. This is Moyo, one of the beautiful leopards of Ruaha National Park in southern Tanzania. Moyo blessed us with a wonderful encounter on my last game drive on my last morning in Ruaha. We were able to watch leopard behavior. We watched Moyo walk his territory of about 2.5-3 kilometers, sniffing the ground and the trees and spraying on the rocks and the trees, marking his territory and investigating the scent of another leopard. We didn't know at the time that another leopard had visited his territory until we saw him climb up into a tree where a female leopard was hiding, to our surprise. One thing that made this encounter so special was the fact that this was exactly the area where Samuel and I had a breakfast picnic just a couple of days earlier. How incredible, the place where we just sat and had a breakfast wrap or a cheese sandwich or whatever it was with our coffee and granola, that this was prime leopard territory. How special is that? I'm totally geeking out on it, even now, a couple of weeks, almost a month removed from this amazing experience. What a beautiful animal, Moyo, the leopard from Ruaha National Park. I sure do appreciate you blessing us with your presence, and I just love looking at these photographs of you. You beautiful animal, you beautiful cat. Love it. Thank you, buddy. Here you can see how safari vehicles may approach the animal. It's kind of unavoidable, but in Ruaha, there never really were too many vehicles on one particular sighting. This is a leopard walking his territory, and there were still only 4 vehicles, counting ours. So we've had a wonderful leopard sighting. We are following it. He's basically walking down the dried riverbank, marking, spraying, scratching on trees, doing all the wonderful things leopards do. When photographing wildlife, I like to accentuate a shallow depth of field, and I use prime lenses, a 600 f4 and a 300 2.8, and I have no shame. I shoot wide open, f4 on the 600 and 2.8 on the 3. The reason I do this is because shooting wide open helps to accentuate the shallow depth of field, bringing the animal into sharp focus against a blurred background. I will also use eye tracking autofocus or spot focus and attempt to put the focus right on the animal's eye. I will agree that this is a bit of high risk, high return photography, but if you catch it right, the results are very, very pleasing. When tracking an animal, if possible, I actually prefer to get ahead of the animal and watch the animal walk towards us. On this particular encounter, we actually found ourselves behind Moyo quite a bit. Perhaps unavoidable with the other safari vehicles, but we do change this in just a bit. All right, we have an amazing leopard sighting. We've been walking with it for about 20 minutes. He's marking territory, scratching on trees. Let me see if I can catch him here. When we saw Moyo go to this rocky area, we decided to take some distance and go across the riverbank and wait and see if Moyo would hunt. There were some impala a little distant but walking towards this watering hole, and they were upwind from Moyo, so they would not know of his presence. However, Moyo gave us quite the surprise. He wasn't interested in hunting impala. Instead, he was looking for a friend.
Where? In the tree. Oh, yes.
So Moyo found the scent that he picked up on 2.5 kilometers earlier. After greeting the female leopard, Moyo descended the tree and entered into the bush. This is when Samuel and I were able to get ahead of Moyo, and we were able to watch him walk right towards us. I even got 1 or 2 photos. A few turned out okay. A couple, the high grass was just in the way. Oh well, it's kind of how it goes sometimes, especially deep in the bush in Ruaha National Park. After watching Moyo in the bush, we actually lost sight of him, showing just how difficult it is to track these animals when they do get into that high grass of the Ruaha bush. So we decided to go back to the female leopard who was in a tree. Little did we know that she was having a snack of a monitor lizard. Here are some of my favorite photos of the female leopard who is in the tree, the female leopard who came through Moyo's territory, and I probably shouldn't say it, but I really wanted to touch her tail. My goodness, that little fluffy tail of a beautiful female leopard. I also really like the leopard coming out of the tree. There was too much bush and scrub for me to get her cleanly in midair coming out of the tree, but we did catch that initial descent, and the whole experience was really cool to see. Alright, please stay tuned for some general wildlife settings that I use on both my Canon R3 and R5, and of course, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate it. Mahalo. Well, that's all for the incredible leopard sighting that I had on my last game drive on my last day in Ruaha National Park. And enjoy these elephants as we discuss the camera settings that I use for wildlife photography. I utilize the custom 1, 2, and 3 settings on both the Canon R5 and the Canon R3, and I primarily use the custom 2. These settings place a priority on sharp, crisp images, and the reason that I do this is because on my first bear encounter, my first grizzly encounter in Yellowstone National Park, photographed a bear for, I don't know, 10 minutes maybe, and not a single image was sharp. I was using a longer lens than what I was accustomed to, and from that experience I just decided that if I'm going to have a wildlife encounter, first and foremost I want sharp, crisp images. So these are the settings that I use for that. So first I go in, set the ISO to auto, and I set a parameter for minimum of 100 and the maximum of 6400 ISO on the R3, and on the R5 I put that down to ISO of 3200 for the maximum. Then auto white balance, and I shoot high speed continuous, high speed plus. Autofocus is servo, and I limit the autofocus areas. The first one I have the camera set on is whole area. We use animal to detect, eye tracking enabled, and for the Canon shooting I use case 2, which I think is pretty sticky. It usually stays on the subject, but I even go in and up that sensitivity so it stays and continues to track the subject. Next, I limit the autofocus areas. I go spot, autofocus, flexible zone, and then whole area. And when I turn off the camera, I try to keep it on whole area. In the case with the leopard, I used spot focus quite a bit. Now, this is important here, the shutter speed. I set a shutter speed parameter on the electronic shutter, minimum of 1/2000th of a second, and then the maximum is whatever the range is, 64,000 or whatever it is. But the minimum of 1/2000th of a second with that auto ISO. That is my go-to action camera settings for wildlife photography. And then I go in, set in for the depth of field preview button, I put exposure compensation there. So I have my exposure bias, I punch that depth of field button, and then I rotate the dial. Now, that's going to be good for anything with the 300 2.8 or the 600 f4. So that's my custom 2 grab and go settings. If I need a little slower shutter speed, then I'll put it to custom 1, which is basically identical settings, and it's 1/1000th of a second for the custom 1. But again, when I turn it off, I have it on custom 2. That way when I pick it up again, I'm ready to go. Now, I realize I went over that quite quickly, but I'll do another episode on these settings, and I'll use examples from photos from the safari. Let me know in the comments if you find these settings useful, or if you think that shooting at this high depth of field is ineffective, and if you like to shoot with a higher f-stop, say at 5.6 or 7.1, let me know. Also, let me know how you like the shutter speed on this. I think cameras now are just made so differently that we can really bump that ISO up quite a bit and still get nice, pleasing images, nice color rendition. But I really think for wildlife images, it's either one of two ways. We have to have it sharp, or we need something quite long, 1/20th of a second, half a second, 1/10th of a second, and have those panning shots. Those are quite nice, but anything in between, it doesn't do it for me. All right, that's all I have. Hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Be sure to like and subscribe. Mahalo.